if you or somebody else is interested in sharing this conversation for today, this will be recorded and I'll send it out. I'll send out the link to everybody as far as where it's going to be hosted and that sort of thing. Joe Jackson is the person that set up our guest speaker from down in Arizona, all the way down there. It's still morning way out west there. And I'll let Joe kind of explain how he came about to have our host speak and sort of what his impression of the place that we're going to hear about. Joe, you want to take over?
Okay, so maybe I'm not completely prepared, but just some honest impressions. Having been in Tucson, just excuse me, about 30 minutes from where we're living, south of Tucson, and stumbling onto the Center for Creative Photography. It's almost one of those things that you might dream about, or you might, if you were experiencing something, say, pinch me, because it just seemed like something so special on the face of the earth. And the more I was usually there with my wife, and for different shows that were on, different photo shows. Some of the outside events that they sponsor are just out of this world. I just was so pleased when I went online, hoping that somebody would even reply to my inquiry. The place has been sort of shut down, as you can imagine, but I got a quick and delightful reply from a gal, Meg Jackson Fox. And as I look at Meg on the screen today, I'm thinking I could be her grandfather, or maybe even great grandfather. Meg has, when I looked at her bio, she's humble or modest, but when I looked at her bio, it was so impressive, and I just was so envious of all of her accomplishments. But the list of photographers whose works are within this wonderful facility, well, we start with Ansel Adams, who was sort of the founder, or I shouldn't say I should say he was part of the origination of this facility. I really know so little about it, but it's so special. And I just think that if Meg would be kind enough to share with us, briefly how it started, and then since we're all about photojournalism, I know that Steve was good enough to include the fact that the word creative could sort of make us a little bit nervous. We're not about creative other than creativity within photojournalism, but there's, I would love just to be quiet now and let Meg explain.
Well, thank y'all for having me, and thank you to Steve and Joe for reaching out and organizing. And I'm going to just try to share my screen and see how this works. Okay.
I just made you the host there, Meg. So
I don't think I am. It's still saying disabled.
All right, stand by. Try it again. Oh, yeah, you must be, because I don't have control over that now.
While we're waiting on that, I'll let y'all know I have a Wisconsin connection, not me, you can tell by my accent that it's very much Mississippi, but my husband's family is from Wisconsin, and they made their way to Arizona in the 70s. And so they have connections to Madison and Partyville, or he says Partyville, but I say Ville. So, okay, it's still not.
Still don't have that? Okay, I'm going to reclaim it and then give it to you again. Try that.
Yep, there we go.
Okay, that should do it.
Got it.
Okay.
Got it.
Great. So what I was going to do is just start a little bit with a quick intro to the CCP, and then tell you a little bit about our upcoming photojournalism installation that we have in our new interdisciplinary gallery. And then I have a few just inside of the archive views for the W. Eugene Smith archive that we have here at the CCP. And then I'll also welcome questions and conversation after that as well, or during that as well. So I'm Dr. Meg Jackson Fox, and the Associate Curator of Academic and Public Programs at the CCP. And we have had an education department in the past, but it kind of lapsed after the recession in 2008, 2009, 2010 here in Arizona. And so this is really the first education department that we've had in the last decade. And I just got on board about a year ago. And so my role is to do education and programs, but we also help and live in, the exhibition spaces. We're in charge of the interdisciplinary gallery. And we've also taken over social media initiatives since April. If you haven't had a chance yet to check out our Facebook or Instagram, I hope that you'll do that soon, because we've been having, archivists and registrars and imaging specialists and faculty and educators across the University of Arizona participate in our Instagram recently. So it really is kind of this little learning hub for photography that we've been really excited about. Let's see, how do I change slides? There we go. I have 3 screens here, so I'm trying to navigate them all. So CCP is really this 360 experience with photography. We collect photography, we are a research hub, we are educators at the University of Arizona. We have a preservation with our archivists, but also a conservation lab as well. So we really do kind of think about it holistically. And it's really unique for us to be both a museum and an archive, and dedicated solely to the history of photography. We were founded in 1975, and this is actually our current building that's on the campus of the University of Arizona. And we have roughly 100,000 fine prints in our collection, our fine print collection. And then our archival collection is numbering up to about 8 million objects at this point. And we are beginning to have large-scale digitization projects so that we can have our materials accessible more largely. And I'd be happy to share with you all our e-museum, because most of our fine prints are available online. Our archival objects actually aren't yet. So that's really the major project that we have coming up. And so in our fine print collection, our archives really support the fine print collection and vice versa. And the real strength here and the opportunity is that we can tell that fuller story of photography. And our strengths are really American modern photography. So a lot of 20th century, a lot of mid 20th century. We have a lot of fashion photography. Actually, it's funny because creative throws off a lot of people, I believe, but photojournalism is one of our core, it's one of our core strengths and one of our core missions as we're beginning to build out. So it's been top of the list for what we're collecting actually right now. And has been since the Gene Smith archive came to the CCP actually in 1976. So this has been a continuation since the founding of the center. We also have a really strong collection of Mexican photography. It's really a regional influence, as well as Japanese photography. Our first director, Harold Jones, and he was, I would say, snatched him in '75 from the George Eastman House. And at the time in the 60s and 70s, there were quite a bit of Japanese photographers who were, in the circles of New York photographers. So there was a close connection between that early director. And so Japanese photography was a really strong interest of his. And as I was saying, we were founded in 1975 by Dr. John Schaefer, who was then the University of Arizona president. And it was co-founded, in fact, Joe, by Ansel Adams. And Ansel Adams was really the reason that a lot of the photographers kind of came with him. Those 5, we have what we call our 5 founding photographers in their archives. And it just kind of opened the floodgates for people coming after that. And it was really a unique, unique institution, because in the 70s, I think the Harry Ransom Center at the University of Texas was really the only other institution that was collecting photography, art photography, in addition to vernacular photography or photojournalism at the same time. So I think that's how we became such a little gem here in Tucson, which we all consider to be a coup. So in addition to our fine print collection, we have our archives and library. We have it's non-circulating. Our library is non-circulating. And we have researchers from all over the United States, all over Tucson, all over Mexico and Japan come here as well. And so we host people from all over the world. We're currently closed, as Joe was saying. We're trying to navigate through this COVID moment. And so what we're trying to do is have opportunities where scholars who are interested in particular materials reach out, and we have a new digital imaging unit that is working to try to create access, at least at the very least digital access, which of course isn't the same as being able to come and navigate through all the different kinds of boxes and such. But and then one other side of our archives and library is our oral history collection. We've been having interviews and talks and different kinds of conversations and symposia since our founding in '75. So it's about 45 years now of an oral history collection just around photography. So photographers, curators, scholars, the kind of the gambit. And I just wanted to show y'all a couple of images from our archive, including Lola Alvarez Bravo, which is an important Mexican modern photographer who we have. And this is one of her photo montages here to the left. And you can see where she was pulling together different images from published prints that she then created into kind of a new conversation about women's university in Mexico. And then this is of a maquette from the Paul Strand archive, so that we have researchers have the opportunity to look at all the ways in which he put his photo essay books together. So we have a study center and a print viewing room, and we have teachers and researchers, as I was mentioning. One of the reasons that Ansel Adams was so interested in bringing his archive here to Tucson was that it was located on a university campus. He didn't want his archive to go into, just kind of this sense of gathering dust and being in a collection that just is closed off. He wanted it to be continued to be studied and grow. And he saw that opportunity on the campus of a university. I actually graduated from the doctoral program here at the university in history and art history. And my absolute favorite experience was here, this print viewing room that you can see in the image. Maybe it's on y'all's right. I don't know if it's the same as mine. But we pull images straight from the vaults and then bring them out. They're unframed. So you just have this really intimate, lovely experience with the photographs. And I consider them sort of this pop-up exhibition where educators in the past, when I was first here in graduate school, would bring out, Ansel Adams prints or the glass, photo glass plates, or this last year we did Bauhaus of 100 years. So we were looking at actual Bauhaus prints from the photographers. So it's just this special, unparalleled access to these original prints. And then lastly, we have gallery spaces down on our first floor. So we're a 3-floor building. And we create new exhibitions. We host traveling exhibitions. Our exhibitions can be from contemporary artists, contemporary photojournalists, but they can also be from just our collection materials as well. Oftentimes when we do that, we use our fine print collection in addition to our archival materials so that we do tell that kind of different story. And we have a main gallery, which is what you're seeing here, as well as what we're calling our heritage gallery, where anything that new that we bring in, we show it as well, so that it's not just going straight to a vault, but instead it gets seen for a bit in the beginning. As of 2006, we also have a gallery space in Phoenix, trying to, open ourselves up to the cosmopolitan crowd. And we have a curator at the CCP who is dedicated to this space in Phoenix. And she uses CCP collection materials that goes up to the Phoenix Art Museum and then creates shows there. We've recently had one on Mexican photography. We have one currently there. They're the only ones open. We're not currently open. On Ansel Adams performing the print, and there will be some coming up on social documentary photography. And then just a last kind of little piece about the CCP in general is that we just built a new interdisciplinary gallery, which we are super excited about. And it is just this really stunning space that we're going to be sharing in November and December. And we're hoping that we'll be able to invite people in soon. It's kind of this interesting experience to be not just a museum, but a museum on a university campus, because it creates this whole other layer of trying to figure out the ways in which we can think about public health and public safety, you know, on a college campus, which is its own whole other kind of experience. But one of the reasons that we wanted to do interdisciplinary in particular was because you know, we wanted to open up access to photography and to visual literacy and visual thinking. And we have this close relationship with the School of Art already. And so, and what I really love about photography, I actually came from, I was a global art historian, a faculty member in Denver previous to this position. And the reason I was so excited about coming back was to really hone in on photography and the medium of photography, because it's so interesting right now, the kind of universalism in some ways that photography has in terms of like how we can make that connection between the visual and all other disciplines, because it really touches so many different sides of our thinking and our being. And so that's really why we're thinking about it to be an interdisciplinary gallery. So our very first one, which I was really excited when Joe reached out, I said this couldn't have been a better time for us to have this talk, because our first one is going to be on photojournalism. And part of that was because in our acquisition of the David Hume Kennerly Archive that we announced last October, was that we had built into that the gallery, kind of building the gallery out, building our digital infrastructure out. And we wanted to, at the very beginning, host his images, host the collection of images that we have. We have about 150 years worth of news imagery and photojournalism, speaking to all versions of historical events. So we wanted to actually begin with that. And of course, we had planned to actually open this in the summer, and that did not happen. And so what we're intending to do in the next 3 weeks is actually do an install of the images that we have and that kind of the conversation that we were hoping to have. And this is really going to be about how we have news images historically, but also how we receive our news today. So trying to make that connection that, you know, we have these social media experiences. A lot of people gather their information from the news. I used to do little thought experiments in my first day of class with my college students. And I would always ask where it is that they get their news. And I would tell you over the last 10 years, it has really shifted. And but in the beginning, it would be just online. And then it kind of slowly went to Instagram or Facebook or Twitter. And then the most concerned I became was a year ago when it was Snapchat. So we can all just hope for the best in the future. But so this is really about photojournalism professionally, but also about citizen photojournalism as well. And so I just wanted to share a couple of the images from our collection that we're going to have be a part of it. And what I really wanted to do was have artworks that critically engage, so fine artists that critically engage with news imagery, in addition to actual images that were available to our news or from photojournalists. So for example, we have Robert Heineken here to the left, and he took images. This is called Waking Up to News in America. And he was really interested in like this kind of consistency, this visual consistency across different news platforms and the way in which we frame ourselves. Right next to Henry Cartier-Bresson and some images from his of the early 20th century in Trafalgar Square in London, as well as this famous image from the National Geographic from Steve McCurry, which is also part of our collection. Steve McCurry also lives here in Tucson. Together with Margaret Burke White and a picture of her from Louise Dell Wolfe in the 1940s. I think this is just a brilliant image of her set up to kind of create this still like kind of feminine woman. She has her nails done, she has her hair curled, she has, lipstick on, but then she is surrounded by maps and images of war. And it's just this interesting parallel for this powerful woman inside of this, a new kind of opportunity for a woman in a career space. Together with John Simmons, who worked with Bobby Singstack at the Chicago Defender, the famous Chicago Defender in Illinois. And he followed Singstack down to Nashville and covered a lot of the the civil rights movements and the post-civil rights movements, when you had this this gathering and this collection of Black activists on university campuses like Fisk University. And this is where this one was taken of Angela Davis. And again, and just bringing in that kind of art component with Tucson photographer Luis Carlos Bernal, who has this brilliant image from the Tucson barrios, where you can see John Kennedy in the background, and kind of how we were thinking about our domestic spaces and disrupting narratives of like Mexican Americans being something different than being American. And then of course we have the classics like W. Gene Smith, that's a part of it. And our newest acquisition here, the David Hume Kennerly image of Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor. This image at the top was quite frequently circulated with the passing of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg recently. And with it, we have this, what I was saying, this social wall, where we are going to be showing, it's just this aggregation of different kinds of social medias where you follow different hashtags or different accounts from photojournalists or from news agencies, where we're really thinking about this connection between images that are from our official news and images from the people around us, from our friends, from our acquaintances, from people we randomly follow, or even just what is a part of our, what it just kind of shows up on our feed. And so we want to create that kind of connection between the historical collections that we have and what is actually happening today. And I would be super interested in what y'all think about the relationship between historical photography and your experiences in photojournalism and this new experience with photojournalism on the social media platforms. And then just lastly, a part of that, we're having a suite of conversations this fall, all also dedicated to photojournalism. Some of them we're just doing in short form. Here you can see with our macro talks, macro ideas that we're hosting on our Instagram television, where Vanessa Charlot is a photojournalist, a young social documentarian in St. Louis, or Dr. Jennifer Good, who studies photography and 9/11 and images of like how we process images after a traumatic event and about a traumatic event. And so they just have these 10-minute little morsels where they're really reflecting on the way in which photography influences our politics, our political beliefs, our political actions. And I really like that kind of, it's a sort of a conversation or a symposium over time. And then we're also hosting larger events like Charisse May, who is a photographer based in Washington, D.C., and is head of the Women Photojournalists of Washington. And she's been really covering the protest. She covers the White House and then walks out the door and then covers the protest. And so it was really interesting to listen to how a Black female photographer is navigating all these different spaces and experiences, and especially when Black women are so underrepresented in the field. And then we had a follow-up with David Hume Kennerly, and I know Joe was there. And so we're doing this all virtually, where we're streaming through YouTube and through our Facebook account. And so those will also be installed in the actual installation, in the installation of Photojournalism 2020. Oh, I need to admit somebody. So then I also just wanted to share, and Joe said y'all are pretty interested in the W. Gene Smith archive here. And we actually, our major acquisition of the archive was in 1976. And this was just 2 years after, a year after even the CCP's founding. Gene Smith actually passed in Tucson, maybe y'all know this. He came to the University of Arizona to teach and work frequently at the CCP. And he actually passed of a stroke here near campus. So we have a long history with Gene Smith. So just to give you a little background, and maybe you know this, but just in case. So he started work in 1937 with Newsweek. He was actually fired because he refused to use a medium format camera, because he said that he preferred the 35mm camera instead, because his hope was that he would be less obtrusive, and that he could be as flexible as possible. And he felt like the medium format was just too cumbersome. I think that's probably very interesting to think about today. And then he joined the Black Star Agency, which as a freelancer. He became a war correspondent in 1943 and then ended up working for Life. And this is what I'm trying to get to, is just this part where we're going to look at Life magazine and his sort of process with Life magazine. And he joined Life around 1945, 1946, but then he also left Life in 1955. He eventually joined Magnum, where he became a full photographer with Magnum Photography in 1957. So what we really love about the archive is that we have this opportunity, the archive of Gene Smith, that we can, and this is just an example, we can walk through the phases of his process for how he would create a photo magazine or a photo essay. And he was really known for his interest in being involved in every part of the editorial process and up until the final presentation. And here you can see where we have actual documentation from assignments that he would receive from Life. This was about the nurse midwife project that he did in 1951. And they would overview the possible locations that he could go and make suggestions about the ones that they felt would be the most representative of the topic. And they had a regional researcher that would do that initial research, and that Gene Smith would actually build on top of. And a part of that was they would provide different contacts in different states so that he could contact them in advance of going in when he made it there. And in this case, it was for South Carolina. And so we characterize Smith's photography as being a really intimate tone and having this close proximity. And I was just mentioning he was hoping to not be, he wasn't hoping not to intrude. I think this is so interesting when you think about him trying not to intrude, and then you see this image of him at work and you wonder, like, was he successful? I mean, he did have these incredibly intimate images, and but he is also like right there with them. And here to the right, you can see where we have his contact sheet. So we can see the swath of images that he produced for the project. And he was very selective of the images. So he would mark with a red crayon which ones he felt were the strongest images to let the editors know what he thought about it. He would also receive shooting scripts from the magazine that would list specific photographs that the editors felt would be best to represent the story. And then he would copy that script over into his reporter's pocket notebook. And he would keep those notes about the picture tops and about possible image sequence in it. And he would just carry it. We have some images of him where he would just carry it in his pocket here. Of a shirt. And I think this is so interesting that you can see from the image from his pocket notebook, this walking in the rain with a bag. And here we can see in the country, his famous country doctor photo essay, him walking in the rain with the bag. And so it's really fun when we bring in students, for example, where they can look at all of these different materials together and really see somebody's process unfold, whether they're photographers or whether they're historians. It's just a really special opportunity to think broadly about these projects. Like I was saying, he also really built onto the research that the locally hired research person would do. And he also did a lot of interviewing in the field prior and concurrent with actually making the images. This is an example of questionnaires that he made for his Spanish Village project in 1950. And he was commissioned by Life to go to the Spanish Village, sort of just, he was commissioned to go to Spain in general, and this was like a goodwill mission, and it was after the Spanish Civil War. And it was meant to kind of capture what life was like under Franco and after. And so he had this really brilliant project where he was looking at this medieval town. And I'll just show you. So he would use these questionnaires that would actually feed the captions themselves. So they became a script, actually, in this example, would become a script for the writers of Life at the same time. And so here you can see where we have the original magazine in our archive. It's seen its better days, but we do have it. And this is part of like why we have such a robust digital imaging project, so that we can, at the very least, preserve these images in perpetuity, even if the actual objects are a little bit more tender and vulnerable. So he would go so far as to actually lay out the entire photo essay for the editors to make suggestions about what they would look like. This was a nurse midwife follow-up story layout that he suggested. So he would use actually his images, lay them out, and he would take already published magazines, take away from those, kind of cut those out and lay those out just to suggest and play with where the actual text might end up. So he was really interested in, and he would even write to the editors to talk about how this essay could function. So very hands-on process. And so when he left Life magazine, it was actually over this A Man of Mercy essay on Albert Schweitzer and his work in Africa. And we have this letter that he sent to Dr. Schweitzer where he was just so beside himself over the way in which the images were shown by Life magazine that he even says, you know, I left, I think where he said, I actually left. I fought as hard as I could, as completely as I could. And when I left, which I did, I resigned from the magazine. So he let Dr. Schweitzer know that he was just so beside himself. And he was known for being, editors described him as being troublesome. And he was a perfectionist to his own, sometimes to his own detriment in that way. But it sounds like he found a good home at Magnum for quite a while. And again, I think that this is also a very fitting time to have this conversation because of a project on Minamata that's happening right now. And this was actually his last photo essay that he did 1971, 1972. And it was in Minamata, Japan, over the deadly effects of industrial mercury pollution that was happening in Minamata. And so the local population was being affected by the marine life. And he's been, this project in particular was complemented over his like having this extensive, really expansive look at what life was like in Minamata, so much so that there were images of joy, there were images of the fishing, of the industry, of the plant, of the actual disease, the Minamata disease itself, and the toll it was taking on the local population's bodies. And he stayed, what he had intended to actually be in Mata for 3 years. He went with his then wife, Eileen Smith, who was of Japanese descent. And they ended up actually staying for 3 years, and because he became so close to the people around him. And I think that really played a part in the way in which the photo essay really tells a fuller story of what was happening in that fishing village. And he was actually badly beaten during one of the protests by people who were attacked or connected to the industry itself. And so much so that he couldn't lift his arm to photograph for quite a while. So he had to use a cable release in his mouth to actually take photo images for a while. There's suspect, he did sustain injuries in World War II when he was in Japan, jumping the islands, covering the different islands offensives of the Americans. And there is a question of whether those injuries, or it was kind of those injuries connected to the Minamata injuries that might have contributed to the decline of his health after this particular essay. But it was published in Life magazine in 1972 and then became a traveling exhibition and publication in 1975. And in fact, MGM is just made a movie that's starring Johnny Depp as W. Gene Smith that is going to be out in February. And so in January and February, where we have photojournalism kind of now more broadly, we're going to specifically hone in on this particular project in January and February in our our virtual events and virtual projects as well. So, and we just actually got to watch it from the MGM studio so that we could have an idea of what it looked like. And we'll be having panel discussions with the cinematographers, with our chief curator, who's also has produced an exhibition on Gene Smith's work that's going to be traveling pretty soon. And so with that, thought I'd open it up for if y'all had any questions or thoughts or impressions or.
I think it's fantastic. And, I was going to ask, like, is there a way to online access the archives that you have, or is that not possible?
It's possible to, hold on, there's someone trying to come in and I need to admit them. It's possible to see our museum, and I'll put our e-museum. So it's our fine print collection. You can see all of it currently. And I'll put a link to that in our chat if I can get it to come. Yeah. But for our archive, currently all of our archive objects, we haven't gotten them wholesale digitized yet. So we only do it project by project. But what we're planning to do in the next year is actually start that like large scale digitization project so that you can see everything. Okay, I put it in chat, the e-museum. And so you can go in there and you can search by artists and you can go and look at all the different ones that we actually have digitized, but it's going to be growing over the years, or we're hoping it's going to continue to grow over the years. We're going to have a specifically dedicated to Gene Smith because of this movie coming out that used the CCP as a resource. So the writers and producers came and researched here at the center. So we're gonna make actually an online virtual exhibition of a lot of his work and images from our archive and from our fine print collection.
Great.
Is the center open regularly? Like day, I realize now during the COVID crisis it isn't, but in general, is it open regularly? Like if there's a schedule, a weekly schedule, hours for the public to go into?
Yes, we are open Tuesdays through Saturdays. We're thinking about Sundays because of the COVID situation. We do open up just so that it's mostly weekend hours. What we're also trying to do currently to be able to be a part of, like to work in the archives or work with the archival materials, that you'll have to have a research project. But what we're trying to do is create public hours so that people who are just interested in particular things that are in the archive, that we can have space by appointment to pull those out as well. Some of that's just trying to navigate. We have a scrappy 22-person staff for all of this. So we're trying to navigate, a lot of interest that we have. And so yes, we are definitely, in normal times, we're definitely open. And I would welcome any of you, if you want to come visit, I would love to personally show you different materials that might be of interest to you.
I know that when I've been in there, it feels a little bit like trying to think of the term, but I feel like I'm welcome in the museum if I behave myself in the, excuse me, in the gallery.
Joe, you behave yourself?
But well, I have my wife to keep me in line, but I also feel like getting a peek onto, as you described, the second and third floors. I have a feeling like that is like off limits. Don't even think about going there. I mean, just my curiosity wants me to explore that building and see more than just the beautiful displays.
Yeah, so I will tell you that part of this is an architectural problem. So for example, our libraries, they have public hours and our students don't even really know about it because you have to go through the entire building, up a flight of stairs, back into the building. And it's just so cumbersome. Like none of it feels inviting. And we are struggling with that on a daily basis. So it definitely is open to the public. But what I would say is that what we do so far is we do either member behind the scenes tours, or we have public groups like, I don't know, I'm assuming everyone's located in different places, or Wisconsin, or maybe here too. But if you had like a group like this, then you could schedule a tour with me and then I would take you through some of those spaces together. So we try to do different kinds of opportunities for it. The third floor is a little bit trickier because we have conservation up there. It's our conservation actual lab, but our conservation, if we have a group of people, then we could take them up and she'll do a demonstration of some of the kind of work that she's been doing. But just because we're trying to kind of navigate somewhere between security and access. So we're trying to do a little bit of both.
Hey, Steve Raymer, I'm just curious, as an instructor yourself in Indiana, and having been with Geographic, I'm just kind of curious, does a lot of this hit home with you? Were you familiar with the Center for Creative Photography? And
I remember when Gene Smith's archive was given to CCP, and that's why I find this so fascinating, because he was one of my heroes as a graduate student and as a young National Geographic photographer. But I'm curious because I think I can think of at least a half dozen sort of fellow professionals from the magazine photojournalism world who are all at the same time now working to kind of organize their archives, and are looking around, people calling me and others to try to find a home for their work. So I think, Meg, a lot of us would probably be curious, how do professionals find a home for their work when they're kind of, you know, on the back nine, I guess, and looking for, looking for a kind of a permanent home for their pictures?
Yeah, that's a great question. So oftentimes what happens is we have a committee that's built out of our archivists. We have faculty on there. We have our curators and educators like me. All of us sit on a committee and we review different, kind of like a proposal, but it's more just a letter and then maybe a selection, a portfolio selection of the prints that are involved, kind of the projects, and what kind of archival materials might be a part of it. And then we go from there, because sometimes we have people who come who might be interested in having an acquisition so that we actually acquire the archive. And we work with different donors. We work with the university in order to try to make that happen. We just deaccessioned the duplicates that we have of Ansel Adams prints. We have so many duplicates of Ansel Adams prints. Deaccession them to create a new endowment so that we could actually start to purchase. So what we do is that we have this committee review that cover letter with all of those materials. And then we make decisions about whether it feels like it would be the best fit here at the CCP, or we actually make recommendations elsewhere. And I believe that's actually a common practice for most archives and museums, so that we can try to help place. I would love for y'all to think about either the CCP or the Harry Ransom Center, because I believe both of those are really great places to start. Sometimes it becomes like a special collections opportunity as well. And I think it really is just a matter of fit. Hope I answered that.
Well, thank you. Thanks
Yeah.
Meg.
Yeah, absolutely.
Meg, I'm curious too about, was it the Bank of America that helped to sponsor the just extraordinary, the most recent one with David Hume Kennerly, of this month in October, but also who I'm wondering who sponsors, who are your big donors? Any names that any of us would recognize possibly?
Well, I mean, the CCP has a storied past, and we are it's really turning into a new this is a new chapter for the CCP, I would say. We have a new director who came in 3 years ago, and about 2/3 of our staff is completely new. Our digital imaging unit is new. A lot of our archivists are new. We're getting a new head of archives. And so actually Bank of America is a recent opportunity for us. And it came because of David Hume Kennerly's relationship with Bank of America. He does a lot of projects with them. And so other than that, we've gotten a few grants. We are starting to build our donor base. So really it's a lot of local donors that have been a part of our success, I guess. And we have donors who are from Chicago and New York. So those are the kinds of people that have been sponsoring us so far. But yes, we are working towards continuing to build that backing for what it is that we're doing.
So you've referenced the Ransom in Texas. Are there other facilities like this in the United States?
Completely dedicated to photography. We do have the International Center for Photography. We have the Museum of Contemporary Photography in San Diego. ICP is in New York. We have the Museum of, I think it's called the Museum of Contemporary Photography, that's also in Chicago. Archives, it's difficult because a lot of them will go to like the Getty, for example. Like the Getty just acquired Ebony and Jet. And so they acquired all of the images and all of the archives of those two magazines. So we have a situation where a lot of like museums that collect a lot of different mediums will kind of pull in these like major monstrous museums will kind of pull in a lot of that material. So we're kind of, it's interesting because we're in art museums, we're in special collections, we're in just photography institutions. So we're a little bit everywhere, which is kind of great, but also, you know, you do wish you could just go like a one-stop shop too.
Okay. You did mention that you had some of the videos was online, some of the programs. What site was that again?
It's on our Center for Creative Photography YouTube, and I'll also put that in the chat. We've just started to build up our YouTube actually because I mean, usually we have lectures in our auditorium, but of course we aren't doing that right now. So we've been doing everything really to be digitally available. The silver lining is that we've had so many people become interested across the country in what it is that we're doing, because, you know, we have different kinds of access and different kinds of opportunity to connect to people. But yes, everything is on our YouTube account.
Great. Anyone else have a question for Dr. Jackson Fox before we thank her? No one else?
Thanks for your time and your presentation. It was really interesting.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank y'all for being here.
That was
Yeah.
marvelous, Meg. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Meg.
And thanks, Joe, for the suggestion. And for those of you that have not been here before, we have a new person with us today, Greg Sheevy. Well, we have several new people today. Greg Sheevy is a friend of mine, and I'm a big fan of his because he hired me. Greg was the chief photographer at WKOW for what, 2-3 years? No, it was a whole bunch of years. I don't
Couple,
remember.
yeah.
And I was former video photographer, but Greg and I both, I guess you could say, dabbled in still photography as well. And, still continue to do so.
Dabbled.
Yeah, dabbled. Greg's an excellent outdoor photographer, landscape photographer, and
Thank you.
he's done lots of good work as well. But
Good to see some of your old timers too, that we knocked heads out in the field every now and then.
I should also mention if any
We got in each other's way.
If unfortunately, if anybody's in the Madison market area that knew Greg Wall, he passed away last week. Doug was a photographer for many years at WISC TV, and he was 67, passed away. He had cancer for a long time, and so he had only retired 2.5 years ago. So too young. So sorry to pass that along as well. Anyone else have anything you'd like to say? This is kind of a free time. Anybody can say whatever they want. Again, the notes that Dr. Jackson Fox passed along are in the chat for the meeting. If anybody has any questions about that or wants to be able to pull that. And I will also offer that if there's anything you'd like to pass along to the group, Dr. Jackson Fox, feel free to email Joe or I, and we'll forward that on to everyone as well. So, or vice versa.
I have one thing. Meg, you mentioned you were from Mississippi.
Yes,
But I don't know if you grew up there, but
I did.
in '68, I was lucky enough to, with a group called Measure for Measure here in Madison, I had Christmas dinner at Fannie Lou Hamer's home.
Oh, wow.
We were picking okra out in the back of our house.
That sounds about right.
Unfortunately, at the time, I'd only had cameras for my first time in my life for about a year at that point, and I had no idea how important a person she was at the time, and still is. And I've just a couple of weeks ago, I finally re-sleeved all of my negatives into plastic envelopes plastic sleeves where I could actually see them instead of the old ones they were in glassine. Now they're in pages where I can actually see them and eventually contact print them. But finally made some prints from them, and there's a lot of images there. I had no idea what was there, but because of those, that was how I got my job at the Capital Times in '69, because that was some of the only people photos I had, because everything else was nature stuff and personal work. So, and I don't know what to do. I know the State Historical Society would love to get their hands on all of this stuff as well, but you certainly sound like a much more interesting place to have it be.
Yeah, absolutely.
Scope. So
I would love for you to send us a message and let us know what all you have.
Okay. Thank you.
Also mentioning ochre, we don't have that here in Arizona. I can't find it for anything, and it is really disappointing. Well, can I ask y'all a question then?
Absolutely.
Well, I would be so interested to hear y'all's thoughts about like the how photojournalism has changed or not changed because of social media right now. So that's part of like one of the conversations that we're having, especially with our university students, and trying to have them think critically about images now. And I would be so curious what y'all think about the profession and just the way in which we're encountering those images now in a different way. If y'all have any impressions.
There's 3 billion photojournalists out there now, all using iPhones. So, and really, you know, I resisted it, but I think it's made the general public a lot more visually literate than, you know, maybe they were 30 years ago, because all these, what you saw in Life magazine or in the newspaper, you know, but now you're bombarded with it constantly. And I think it has this effect, you know, and I think people do become, they learn visually, you know, rather than just literally, the way I think we were brought up. I was brought up in school, you know, not really even being taught anything visually, except, you know, if you took an art class or something. So, and I think when, you know, back when I started back in the 70s in photojournalism, most of the editors were all very literal minded, you know. I mean, the reporters, they thought about what the reporters were doing and their stories. But by the end of my profession, like when I left the Milwaukee Journal Sentinel in the end of 2014, and it was different, and they really appreciated the photographers, and they knew the importance of photography, just to, you know, not just to tell the story, but also to get the audience's attention to read the story. So I think it's you know, it's a mixed bag, but it's I think it's, you know, it's just an evolution.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I agree with Gary. I know Gary can attest to this. You know, I think the young photographers coming up now, because of the downsizing of newspapers, newsprints. I know when Gary and I both by the time we left, we'd go out on an assignment, and you know, besides getting still photos, they wanted video. We just had to shoot some video, and then maybe we had to actually act as a reporter, because there wasn't enough reporters on staff to maybe always go out with the photographers. So, you know, you had to wear a lot of different hats on the assignments than from when we first started. So it's kind of changed. I remember right before I left, you went out on a news assignment. They wanted you to get a couple quick pictures with your iPhone, get it transmitted back to the paper so they could put it up on the website right away. So yeah, it's I think the new technology is sort of kind of changed the way photojournalists have to operate.
Yeah.
One of our more recent Zoom meetings dealt with, instead of being welcome, the photojournalist could be viewed as not being welcome, being part of the enemy, being threatened. That was a conversation that was left open-ended. I mean, it's like, what is happening? And you know, we were citing the specific example in Madison, Wisconsin, on one of the horrible protest nights, and I mean, the feeling that we used to have as photojournalists arriving on a scene, it was like, God, I mean, it was like we legitimized whatever the event was. I mean, it was like, kind of felt kind of special, in fact. And I think there's an element of fear for body and camera equipment. I mean, it's just like, man, some of the protests that a lot of us covered back in the 70s is like, this is a whole different generation of protests. And a lot of, I don't know, Steve Raymer, I mean, I'm thinking, are you teaching, or have you been teaching? Well, I mean, it occurs to me that you might have some thoughts on that.
Well, I left National Geographic to come to Indiana here to teach primarily visual things. And we ended up, having so few photojournalism students. I just sort of found myself gravitating away from teaching visual things to teaching international things. And right now I'm teaching a course on witnessing war and terrorism that in a way has nothing to do with taking pictures, but it's sort of it's history and political science and a little bit some visual journal or media studies. But the idea of the protests, this is really troubling. I can remember being with Bruce Fritz in Madison at protests, and you're absolutely right. If Bruce Fritz showed up or Norm Lemberg at a protest, that meant it was important, And today, in fact, young people in the National Press Photographers Association particularly have tried to push this photographers Bill of Rights, I think it's called, or something like that, where, there's this whole idea that we're going to seek permission before we shoot, and we're going to be welcome as if we're Richard Avedon at a portrait photography session or a fashion session. And in fact, I still think that our job is to record what happens for the sake of history. And I talk to students about photojournalists have to take that kind of unblinking look at life. And when I say unblinking, I mean, it's can be a pretty unvarnished and unbathed or unwashed and pretty raw look at life. But in fact, that's our job. And it's increasingly more difficult, partly because of, I think, not everyone agrees that is our job. There is a kind of a political correctness today that's young people have adopted who are shooting pictures that, well, I have to be welcome and I have to be embraced for me to feel comfortable and for me to feel legitimized. As I recall, and I mean, I'm looking at Bruce Fritz and thinking, we were probably never welcome with the Students for Democratic Society or the Black Panthers, but we sort of elbowed our way in and got our pictures, usually in public places. Or I can remember the night or the day that the Kent State shootings occurred. I came out of a graduate school class in Madison and saw the Capital Times headline. And I thought, boy, there's going to be trouble tonight. The kids burned down the Kroger's grocery store on West Johnson Street that night. And I mean, that was a kind of a dramatic example. But people in the process of burning down Kroger's were not saying to Bruce Fritz or to Norm Lemberg or to Steve Raymer, hey, come on and get a picture here. It's something that we internalized and felt that this was our obligation to record this stuff. And I guess what's really most troubling is the newer generation of kids who really
lost them.
Gonna leave us hanging, I guess.
I didn't know it was coming to me.
I go back a little farther than most of you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, my picture doesn't come up. But anyhow, when we covered the demonstrations in Milwaukee during the 60s, This was a demonstration for housing for African Americans, and we traveled with the crowds, and we were somewhat respected. At least they didn't attack us or didn't take our cameras. And we got to go places and be with different groups, and there was no trouble whatsoever. And also photographers got to go places in the city where most people could not go. We were walking on top of City Hall. We were walking through City Hall with all their permission. We traveled in courtrooms. We took pictures in courtrooms. And the judge would would tell the person who was standing before him to shut up and sit down and face the camera. And we would take a picture. But today, I don't think you can do that.
I don't think so.
And so, those photographs were in the newspaper, and people would never have seen the photographs. Even if you had your telephone with you, you wouldn't be able to do this. Things have changed that much. The other thing that has changed is lighting. There are no such things as lights except the little camera, the little light you have on your telephone or your camera. And back in the 50s and 60s, we spent a lot of time separating our subjects from the blurry backgrounds that would never get reproduced in the newspaper. And so we had lights behind people, over people, to the side of people, only so that it would reproduce in the newspaper. That's all.
Yeah, Dick, nobody did it better than you guys at the Journal and the Sentinel. The way you guys knew how to use lighting was it was awesome, and that was partly because of your press.
Well, that's true. The fellow that designed the strobe units worked at the Milwaukee Journal.
That's almost another story, you know. Meg, what Dick just said. Say it again, Dick. About the origin
the strobe unit. The origin of the strobe unit came from a man that was a photographer for the Milwaukee Journal. And so the Milwaukee Journal issued strobe units to all the photographers. And so lighting was the magic of it all. We went from flash bulbs to strobe units, and it changed photography at that point for the newspaper people.
Dick, I remember when I first started there and going back into the lab with Dean and some of the people, and there used to still be the archives there of the run of press cameras that actually would take 3 different pictures in the a red RGB, and there were also lenses that the Milwaukee Journal had built, like 400 millimeters and specialized lenses like that, just so we could get, I mean, it was before my time, but it was so that they were like at the forefront. They were kind of not only the inventors, but they were also the beginnings of a lot of what's progressed now,
That would be an interesting wing of your facility, is to get the equipment, that specialized equipment that people used over the years and years. And maybe Joe could donate a few items. I'm sure he's got some.
I had Norm Lenberg sell all of my equipment at the right time.
Following up on what Steve was saying, watching the protests in Minneapolis and after, it was frightening to me watching what was happening, how the media was being targeted with the quote rubber bullets that weren't supposed to hurt people. I don't know if any of you guys saw the Sunday morning show where they featured that. It was a feature about that and how a couple thousand people have been, permanently maimed for life with those things. But what actually triggered me getting back into my Fannie Lou Hamer pictures was one of those nights on the national news, they had a story about Fannie Lou Hamer's niece who got hit in the eye socket. I don't know yet today if she can still use it or not, see out of it. And her story, I mean, she was totally innocent. She was not doing anything, and yet she was targeted with those rubber bullets, and lots of other people were as well. And then watching in Madison, Joe, the riots that were happening on State Street, where they're burning cars in Madison on State Street, the media was getting targeted even then here, which I wanted to go down and try to cover some of that stuff. And I decided after that day after Kent State, which was May 5th of 70, if I remember right, and when I've got those shots of tear gas flying and all over and 10,000 people running, I got tear gas that day by the police, but also hit with a stone in the chest that just missed my brand new cameras. That when I went back and told Sweeple about it, they decided then that we weren't going to send photographers anymore because it was too dangerous. They were too obviously identifiable being with the press. And the people that were throwing stones and stuff, they didn't want us there, and neither did the police documenting what was happening on their end. So the way it's like a war zone now to try to cover, and you've got to be really brave to be out there, I think.
Well, Meg, on top of that was back at the Wisconsin State Journal, the morning paper in Madison, Wisconsin, one of the photographers another Zoom meeting this week, and he said that the company bought a flak jacket, maybe in anticipation of things that are coming up
Next week.
Next week.
Let's hope not.
So it's interesting. Your question certainly conjured up a lot of memories, and it was a great question, Meg.
Thank you.
All right. Anything else? We should probably wrap things up. Unless you guys would like to chat, you can stick around as long as you'd want. We have unlimited Zoom time, so.
I just wanted to say something to Steve. I don't think we've ever met in person, but I used to work at the Janesville Gazette, and I know you had Beloit connections and maybe grew up there, I'm not sure. But when I went to the Milwaukee Journal, I was doing a story on child mortality over in India, Nepal, and Bangladesh. And a friend of mine that was still he wasn't at the Janesville paper anymore, but I had worked with him, Tom Bowditch. I don't know if you remember that name or not, but he said, contact Steve Raymer, because he just did this book on the railroad going across India, and so I got a hold of you and gave you a call, and you gave me a lot of good advice, and the stories ended up winning the Overseas Press Club Award. But really the most important word of advice I think that you gave me was wear boxer shorts and not tighty whities because it's so hot and humid there.
Well, you're very kind. Yeah, well, India is still a wonderful place to work because it's newsworthy every place you turn around, and also I think it's a relatively easy place to work as a photojournalist. And I'm from Beloit, where my dad was editor of the paper when I grew up. So I sort of grew up around, newspapers. But anyway, it's wonderful to see all of you, and especially to see people that I used to work with, I can't believe it. So let's keep doing this, please.
Absolutely. If anyone has any suggestions for speakers in the future too, we pass it along to Joe or I, and we'll be happy to try and line somebody up. Or one of you might be called upon to be a speaker next time.
So I saw Pete Souza was there in the beginning, but after Meg's talk, he wasn't there anymore. Has he talked much with the group or not?
Yeah, absolutely. He's been here since I ran into him at a book signing and just asked if he would be interested. We used to do this like in person and just go out for breakfast in the mornings. And And of course, that came to a screeching halt. But he was very interested in joining. He came to 2, I think, breakfasts that we had, and then he started, and we invited him to the meetings here. And he had a doctor's appointment he had to go run to, but he wanted to make sure that this was going to be recorded, which it is, and so he's going to be following up on the rest of the conversation later, he said.
How do we see the other recordings? I mean, this is the first meeting I even knew about, and I'm really glad I could be part of it. So
Yeah, there was one. I recorded the last meeting. Unfortunately, due to the space limitations in the recordings, I'm only able to keep one on there at a time. I could maybe do a little research on that and keep these or post them on YouTube or something like that. And then we can kind of keep a running archive of them or something like that. That might work.
that'd be great.
Yeah, appreciate the suggestion.
Okay.
By the way, I think Bruce wins the award for best Zoom lighting for today.
And
Mine needs a lot of work.
and Bruce has the most books, Bruce.
Oh, that's not even a 10th, probably a 20th of my books. I'm not kidding. When I started in photography, in '67, when I bought my first camera, there were hardly any books about photography anywhere. I mean, here in Madison, in the library or anywhere. So I just started buying them then. And they're not all photo books. I mean, most of these are related, but it was scary when I moved here. And when I move out, it's going to be a lot scarier because we've been here over 20 years now.
We did a study on books on photography, and you can tell like in the 70s, it just exploded. But before that, I mean, you could count on all of our fingers.
Exactly.
It's incredible.
I can remember when we built bookshelves in Bruce's house on Raymond Road, and he was going to own every book about photography as it was published. And I think
How's it going?
Definitely gave up. I would need your museum now.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was a better series than the Time Life books that came out in the 70s.
Good one.
God, they were great.
Other than the NPPA books that came out every year, right?
That was good.
Oh yeah, those are good. I like those.
So Meg, are you a photographer?
I'm not. I came out of the history line, but I studied mostly in Europe and Eastern Europe and the Balkans. So I got really excited about photography and visual technology. And so I came into the arts late.
I hope you never lose your accent.
I sure hope not either. I haven't lived in the South in 10 years. And I'll tell you, my family tells me that I'm starting to lose it. And I told my mother that's the meanest thing she's ever said to me. Everyone out here says I'm not losing it, but.
Once you started dropping the y'alls, I knew you weren't from Arizona.
Right. I know everyone teases me here because I use them in emails because it's functional. It's functional.
I think one year in our Wisconsin Press Photographers judging, I think Eugene Smith was one of the judges.
Yeah.
And it was close to 76, but I don't know if it's 76 or 75. I can't remember for sure. But yeah, he was definitely here.
Oh, that's interesting.
So.
Well, great. Yeah, I think we'll wrap this up. I appreciate everybody joining us, and Dr. Meg Jackson Fox, thank you again.
It was
Really
nice to
appreciate
meet
it.
y'all and get
Thank
to
you.
visit. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All
Awesome.
right. We'll see you next month.
everybody.
Thanks, Joe.
All right.
Thanks, Steve.